class, today I will be your teacher. Today we will be learning history.
What's that for?
That, class, is for our history lesson today. 9.2, diseases after the 1900s and the technological advancement after it. Yes?
How have environmental factors affected the human population since the 1900s?
Wow, that is a very specific question. Well, that will become our topic sentence for today. Basically, as our planet becomes more contaminated and poisoned, it leads to more disease and epidemics, which inevitably kills off our population. Essentially, when the planet dies, we die as well. Now, to segue into our topic, you need a bit of context. Like, disease was a heavy contributor to the death of populations for years. Like in Egypt and native populations of America and Australia, they had smallpox, which devastated their population until up to the 1960s. And then in the 1979, they finally declared no more smallpox, except where they had it in a little containment in the health organization. So as science and medicine advanced, disease and viruses began to decrease, and illness-related deaths began to drastically decrease in the 1900s. Medicine technology was slowly improving since the dawn of time. Mind you, it was very slow though. But by the 1800s to 1900s, its advancement skyrocketed. Technology got so much better, they even developed things like the artificial hearts and heart transplants. Oh. Okay, so you need 3 vocab words. Write them down. Vaccine, first created in 1796 by Edward Jenner, it is a substance used to stimulate immunity to an involuntary infectious disease or pathogen. And then disease, classified as a disorder of structure or function in any living thing, especially one that has a known cause and distinctive group of symptoms, signs, or anatomical structure. Finally, epidemic, a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. Now, let's start our lesson.
Had a little bird, his name was Enza. I opened up the window and influenza. Are you okay, sis? No, sis! Sis! I have some news. Whatever is it?
You're going to die.
Of influenza?
Yes.
Well, tell Enza that he was a good bird. No! Sis!
1918 influenza epidemic. The textbook definition of the 1918 influenza epidemic is it was the worst pandemic in human history, caused by 3 waves of influenza that swept across the globe in 1918 and 1919, carried and demobilized soldiers, refugees, and other dislocated people returning home from World War I. Between 50 million and 100 million people died in this pandemic. First recorded case was in March 11, 1918 in the United States. Overcrowded and unsanitary conditions created a fertile breeding ground for the deadly virus. After the first outbreak, the Army reported similar outbreaks in the rest of the states. When American soldiers hit French shores in the First World War, the virus exploded, striking the Allied forces and Central forces in equal force. It's called the Purple Death. From the battlefields to Europe, it spread quickly into the other nations. The disease spread to Norway, China, India, and as far as New Zealand. Even islands weren't safe. Japan was soon infected by the flu. Picture above. By the summer of 1918, it hit Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, the Philippines, and Hawaii. The United States started to quarantine, and the pandemic ended in the 1920s, but it left its mark in the world. Technological developments. To develop a better understanding of the flu, scientists applied procedures used in earlier decades to find the cause of many diseases such as yellow fever. In 1931, scientists discovered the presence of H. influenza made swine flu worse, but did not cause it. In 1936, they discovered that people living and working on pig farms had antibodies to fight swine flu, but showing the disease was closely related. Contemporary researchers developed techniques to view such small particles, use electron microscopes, and chemically identify them as being made up of primary protein and ribonucleic acids. Scientists discovered that viruses can be grown in fertile chicken eggs. They no longer needed to get two samples from people/animals. They identified there were two strands of flu viruses, A and B. In the 1930s, they began working on a vaccine. In 1937, British researchers tested a vaccine on soldiers, and in 1938, the U.S. Army began tests of vaccines with a research team. The first mass use of an influenza vaccine for soldiers in the United States was in 1944, and for civilians, 1945. During the research for this vaccine, it was discovered that immunity of one type of virus does not give immunity for another, so the vaccine controlled both types. How is it relevant today? The influenza virus constantly mutates. This mutation is usually only minor changes, so pharmaceutical companies are usually able to counteract each year's strain with a proper flu vaccine. However, historical records show that the world every 10 to 40 years will suffer a global flu pandemic, the result of a major antigenic shift. Today, we still use the fertile egg method to grow and study viruses. It led to our better understanding of genes and chemicals that encode them.
The 2010s. We're the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're studying Ebola.
Yeah.
Oh, hello, good sir.
Yes.
We're studying Ebola. Do you know what that is? Well, it's so simple, my son can explain it. What is Ebola, Ichiro?
A bowl of cereal.
A bowl of cereal? Oh, son, you must be getting from heat exhaustion. Go get some rest, sonny. Ah! Ah! I'm bit by a bat! Well, at least Ebola is not spread by bats.
Several days later.
Well, that's another 2 added to the statistic. It explains why she was so sick after being bitten. Can someone make sure I schedule my appointment with my doctor?
The textbook definition of Ebola is it refers to a contagious viral disease originating in Africa, transmitted through blood and body fluids, causing severe internal bleeding and organ failure, often resulting in death. Ebola is a deadly disease caused by the virus that infects the African fruit bat, humans, and other primates. Humans get the disease from exposure to fluids or infected people or animals. Ebola enters the body through cuts in skin or when touching one's eyes, nose, or mouth. The disease causes excessive bleeding and organ failure. In 2014, a massive outbreak in West Africa caused fear around the world. Ebola was discovered in Congo in 1976. After patient 0 contracted Ebola in Guinea in 2013, the disease quickly spread to Liberia and Sierra Leone, becoming the deadliest occurrence of the virus was discovered in 1976. Ebola was then spread to Monrovia, an urban center instead of a rural center. The response to the virus had to be changed. Nigeria then gets infected. Quarantine. Ebola, technological developments/relevance. An experimental Ebola vaccine proved highly protective against the deadly virus in a major trial in Guinea. The vaccine is called RVSV Zabov. Was studied in a trial involving 11,841 people in 2015. It led to fieldable diagnostics, rapid testing, and improved surveillance technologies. This led to the U.S. regulatory approval of diagnostic tests, 2 vaccines, and 2 therapeutics for Ebola virus indications. Moreover, the establishment of fieldable diagnostic tests improved the speed of which patients can be diagnosed and public health resources can be mobilized.
Wow, I got my doctor's reports back, she said with joy. Little did she know. I got HIV.
HIV/AIDS. Textbook definition of HIV is a pathogen that spreads primarily through sexual contact, contaminated blood products, or the sharing of needles. After sparking a global pandemic in the 1980s, it spread rapidly across the globe and caused tens of millions of deaths. HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Disease, and AIDS stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. HIV causes AIDS. It killed more than 25 million people around the world. HIV weakens the immune system, so people are more easily to succumb to this illness. Funding on the research of this disease, which was in the early days associated with homosexual men and drug addicts, was difficult to come by, and a high number of patients died. CDC formed a task force in the summer of 1981. In late 1981, cases began to see injection drug users. Cases showed that the pattern of infection could be transmitted by blood. By early 1982, health experts were concerned that the transmission of the disease could be transmitted through heterosexual contacts and transmission through newborns or blood supply. They were right. In 1983, CDC researchers chemists conduct tests on biological fluids in AIDS patients. They discovered that it's an infectious disease, not a biological disease. By 1986, CDC worked to educate the people about HIV/AIDS. By the 20th century, AIDS has become one of the great public health challenges. While AIDS can be managed, there's still no cure. technological developments and relevance. Antiviral drugs can stop HIV from weakening the immune system, thus allowing a patient to live with the virus for many years. However, the drugs were very expensive, and so access to treatment was difficult, particularly for patients in poor countries. Brazil is a notable exception. After 2000, the World Health Organization, the United States government, and private groups increased funding for AIDS prevention and treatment, but the disease remains a serious problem. In 2018, about 40 million people globally were living with HIV. Each week, more than 600 young women between ages 15 and 24 become affected. The IRP study provided the first evidence that latent HIV in people receiving antiviral therapy arises from the unique patterns in genes of activity in infected cells. These distinctive features help explain the remarkable ability of the virus to persist in the body even when not being spread and being able to be spread by cells. An improved understanding of how HIV-infected cells persist in people who are receiving antiviral therapy that paved the way to the creation of medications that specifically target those cells, eliminate HIV from the body. HIV and AIDS is still a prevalent disease today. 39 million people worldwide, including 500,000 people in the United States. An estimated 1.1 million people live with HIVs and AIDS a year. About 38,000 new HIV infections occur every year.
Okay, you should know the 3 vocab words: HIV, Ebola, and the flu. Did you write them down? Perfect. Any questions? Yes.
I have no questions.
Okay.
A little while later.
Malaria is an acute purple illness caused by Plasmodium parasites, which are spread to people through the bites of infected female mosquitoes. It is often characterized by periodic attacks of chills and fevers. It can be life-threatening. Symptoms often include fever, chills, headaches, muscle aches, fatigue, chest pain, breathing problems, coughing, diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. It is the most common disease in Africa and some countries of Asia, while in the developed world, malaria often occurs as imported from epidemic areas. The sweet sage wort plant was first used as in the 2nd century BC to treat malaria fever in China, and then much later, DNA started being used as an anti-malaria drug. The whole battle against malaria started in 1955. Croatia declared 1964 to be the eradication of malaria. The World Health Organization comes out with a malaria control program on a global scale, focusing on the local strengthening of primary health care, early diagnosis of the disease, timely treatment, and disease prevention. Globally, the burden of malaria is lower than 10 years ago. However, in the last few years, there's been an increase in the number of malaria cases. It is moving towards targets established by the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, but that progress has slowed down. Malaria's prevalence today. Malaria remains a severe public health problem globally, with an estimated 24 million cases and 608,000 deaths in 2023. In 2024, there were 263 million cases and 597,000 deaths in 83 countries, with the World Health Organization Africa region carrying a disproportionately high share of global malaria burden. Efforts to control and prevent malaria continue, especially among children under the age of 5 in the African region. Technological advancements in malaria research have led to innovations in various areas of malaria response. For example, surveillance, microplanning, prevention and management, diagnosis, development of new diagnostic tools, integration of genomic data with epidemiologic information, non-invasive detection methods, and computerized technologies. Oh man, I think I have some tuberculosis. Is that... Tuberculosis is an infectious disease caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacteria. It generally affects the lungs, but can also impact other parts of the body. The term tuberculosis comes from the Latin word for nodule, or something that sticks out. Symptoms often include persistent coughing that produces blood or mucus, chest pain, weight loss, loss of appetite, fatigue, fever, night sweats, chills, swelling that doesn't go away, and sometimes nail clubbing. It has been theorized that the genus Mycobacterium originated more than 150 million years ago in the Middle Ages, which was at the time known as scrofolia, a disease affecting cervical lymph nodes. It was described as a new clinical form of tuberculosis. The illness was known in England and France as evil and was widely believed that the person affected could heal after a royal touch. In 1720, for the first time, the infectious origin of tuberculosis was pondered by the English physician Benjamin Martin, while the first successful remedy against it was the introduction of sanatorium cure. The famous scientist Robert Koch was able to isolate the tuberculous bacillus
and presented this extraordinary resort to the Society of Physiology in Berlin on 24th of March, 1882. In the decades following this discovery, they did a bunch of skin tests, and a bunch of anti-tuberculosis drugs were developed. This is prevalence today. Tuberculosis remains a significant health concern. While tuberculosis rates in the US are low, the disease is on the rise globally, and certain populations are at high risk. Tuberculosis is the 10th leading cause of death worldwide, and is the most lethal among infectious diseases, surpassed only by COVID-19 in recent years. Technological advancements in tuberculosis research include developing faster methods for testing saliva samples for tuberculosis, targeting proteins used by the bacterium to steal ions from host cells, and working on targeted treatments and earlier diagnostics for tuberculosis.
Man, I'm feeling a little bit thirsty. Is that some water?
I hope there's no potentially dangerous disease like cholera in here.
A few hours later.
Man, I'm feeling a little funny.
A few moments later.
Hey, what's going on, bro? Oh, why is everyone talking to me?
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Cholera. Cholera is a bacterial disease usually spread through contaminated water. Cholera causes severe diarrhea and dehydration. Left untreated, cholera can be fatal within hours, even in previously healthy people. Symptoms often include diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, dehydration, intense thirst, muscle cramps, restlessness, rapid heartbeat, headache, and sometimes a fever, although rare. One of the first detailed accounts of cholera epidemic comes from Gaspar Correa, Portuguese historian and the author of Legendary India, described an outbreak in the spring of 1543 of a disease in Ganges Delta, which is in the South Asian part of Bangladesh and India. The local people called the disease morxi, and it reportedly killed within 8 hours of developing symptoms and basically killed people almost the same day. Numerous reports of cholera manifestations along the west coast of India by Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British observers followed throughout the next few centuries. The first cholera pandemic emerged out of Ganges Delta with an outbreak in India, 1817, stemming from contaminated rice. The disease quickly spread throughout most of India, modern-day Myanmar, and modern-day Sri Lanka by traveling along trade routes established by Europeans. In 1820, cholera had spread to Thailand, Indonesia, killing thousands of people on the island of Java alone, and the Philippines. From Thailand and Indonesia, the disease made its way to China in 1820 and Japan in 1822 by way of affected people on ships. Cholera's prevalence today. As of June 2024, the United Nations World Health Organization, which is WHO, has announced a spike in cholera in several regions of the world, with almost 195,000 cases and over 1,900 deaths reported in 24 countries since the start of this year. 11 countries are currently reporting active outbreaks, with 6 countries classified as in an acute crisis for cholera. The rollout of rapid diagnostic tests and new vaccine offer some promises in the fight against the growing numbers of cholera outbreaks worldwide.
Okay, did you get all the other vocabs down? Do you have any questions? Know everything about cholera and stuff? Any questions? No questions at all? Okay, good job.
Hey, it's been so long. Yeah, how have you been? You know, the same old. Oh, yeah. How have you been, though? Oh, man, it's been rough lately. I've been exercising, I've been drinking alcohol and smoking. I haven't been eating healthy either. Like, I'm sure it's fine, right? Oh, my chest!
Heart disease. The definition, it's also known as cardiovascular disease, and heart disease refers to conditions that affect the heart and blood vessels. And basically, as more and more people started living longer, more diseases started to become known that are associated with old age. It can actually be traced all the way back to ancient Egypt, and it was initially uncommon, probably because they didn't live that long back in the early 1900s. But as they started living longer, this disease became more of a concern. Risk factors are poor lifestyle, family history of heart-related illness, obesity, infection, etc. So, what is the relevance of heart disease today? Well, today, heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. And so it's very important to, know what we're dealing with, especially because it's the leading cause of death in the US. And so a major breakthrough was the first heart transplant by Christian Bernard. Another big breakthrough was Robert Jarvik making a artificial heart. And there were other researchers that worked towards studying heart diseases and conditions, and that definitely allowed for people with heart diseases to live longer in the 2000s compared to back in the 1970s where they didn't know much about it.
Hello, so what brings you in here today?
My grandpappy has been experiencing some devastating symptoms. Tell him, grandpappy!
I don't know, I've just been forgetting things lately.
Okay, so we're gonna take some tests and check your medical and family history, and then we'll get started from there.
Okay.
Okay, I've got some bad news. I think you have Alzheimer's.
No! I have Alzheimer's? I have Alzheimer's? No!
Okay, the next disease is Alzheimer's disease, and the definition is a progressive and deadly brain condition that slowly destroys memory, the ability to perform tasks, and thinking skills. And it's like the same situations with the heart disease, how when people started living longer, they started discovering or studying more, looking into diseases that are associated with old age. It was discovered in 1906 by German psychiatrist Alois Alzheimer, and he named it after himself. And it affects elderly and some middle-aged people, and it is neurodegenerative, meaning that it just damages the brain as time goes on. And patients experience behavioral changes and hallucinations, and they end up, like, the most common symptom is losing their memory. Relevance of Alzheimer's disease today. It is a very common disease with around 6.7 million Americans in the age group 65 years or older having this disease, and that statistically means that in that age group 1 in every 9 people have Alzheimer's. The number is just expected to grow as the population increases because scientists still haven't found a 100% cure for it. They found ways to treat it temporarily and slow it down, but there isn't anything to actually go back to how their brain already was or just stop the disease altogether. So some medications are listed here, and some recent treatments are also listed here as well. Yeah, this is super important to know because so many people have it and there's still not a 100% foolproof treatment. Oh my gosh, I think I'm getting sick. I hope I don't have smallpox. Smallpox, and it is a contagious viral disease caused by the variola virus, and it triggered a very well-known pandemic with a mortality rate of 30%. The origin of the disease is still not known, but it's believed to have emerged from northeastern Africa. It actually plagued the ancient Egyptians, and also when the Europeans colonized the Americas and Australias, because the native population in those areas didn't have immunity. They were also wiped out in huge numbers, causing like a very mass death amongst themselves. And smallpox peaked during 1870 to 1875, which was called the Great Smallpox Pandemic. And survivors that had that disease would also experience complications and scars and sometimes even blindness. So here are the causes, just with having any contact with the disease, and symptoms are high fever, fatigue, backache, and the most characteristic symptom of all, which is the rash that they had. The relevance of smallpox today. So basically what happened is that the World Health Organization made a global vaccine campaign to wipe out the disease, and in 1979 scientists were actually successful in creating a vaccine, and it had been wiped out around the planet entirely, and yeah, except for some of it has still been kept alive at the Centers for Disease Control. And smallpox is, this is so relevant to today's time and age because smallpox was the first vaccine to have been developed ever to get rid of a disease and to successfully work. So that discovery definitely was a huge step forward in science and medical related fields. And we use vaccines today and we utilize them very often, and yeah.
And that's it, class.
Did you like that final sequence? Yes.
Did you learn everything?
Yes.
Did you get all the vocab words?
Yes.
Good job. Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
Can I go pee?
Any final questions?
Okay.
Class dismissed.